Good morning, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you to the Luxury Communications Council Leaders Forum. Not such a glamorous location as in past years, but I hope you are sitting comfortably at home for what will be a truly insightful morning. As most of you know, I am Rosie Shephard, the founder of the Luxury Communications Council. We launched the network in 2017 with the mission to drive the luxury industry forward, gathering together the brightest and the most innovative communication and marketing directors from the sector. Nearly 4 years on, inviting only those who have truly made waves in the industry and looking to make waves, we're now 75 members, all in-house, all heads at major global brands, representing the key vertical sectors of luxury. Members include Burberry, Net-a-Porter, Farfetch, Estée Lauder, LVMH, Richemont, Roland, Cartier, Soho House Group, Maserati, to name just a few. As of 2020, we also welcomed a handful of industry partners to ensure we're representing the entire luxury sector. The Leaders Forum is our opportunity to welcome the wider luxury community. Whether you are journalists, agency directors, or other luxury experts, I am so pleased to be able to once again give you an insight into who we are and what we do. Before we get going, I'd like to thank our partners. Firstly, a very big thanks to Launchmetrics. Launchmetrics is the leading brand performance cloud used by fashion, beauty, and luxury executives to connect with the modern consumer in our constantly changing landscape. Thank you also to ePressPack, who are completely changing the way journalists and PRs interact with each other through digital communication solutions. Thank you also to luxury specialist digital agency, Ver Brands, and Spot on Minds, luxury specialist recruitment firms. Our beautiful invitations this year were created by Downey Luxury Printing Services. For introduction to any of our partners, please pop me a note in the chat at any time or pop me an email. Today, we're going to look at some of the most pressing industry issues, as well as hearing about how we can work more closely with some of our favorite journalists and titles. We'll be kicking off shortly with Vogue Business, looking at future 2021, the issues of today and tomorrow. At 9:30, we'll be discussing the new way of connecting with consumers with the head of luxury for EMEA at TikTok, the Global Vice President of Digital and Innovation of Burberry, and the Chief Marketing Officer at Launchmetrics. At 10:30, we're focused on the new era of luxury hospitality, looking at how, despite the dismantlation of the industry over the last 8 months, that we may have an opportunity to rebuild a better industry. We'll be looking at that with travel editor at Vanity Fair, the founder of the hottest new restaurant in town, Louis, and director of BAME Women in Travel. At 11:20, we'll meet the editors of Harper's Bazaar, Town & Country, Elle and Esquire. And at 12:15, we'll be honoured to present Justine Picardy in conversation with Jacqueline Yui, Chief Luxury Officer at Hearst UK. Finally, at 1 p.m, for LCC members and official partners, we have our intimate networking session at our virtual Maison de LCC. Those partaking have a separate calendar invitation. Each session has its own agenda and separate link, all found on the email itinerary shared with you yesterday. They can also be emailed to you in an hour before we start. They will also be emailed to you an hour before we start the session. They're also all available on the forum microsite, which is hopefully where you're watching everything now. We will be recording each session and we'll share these with you afterwards should you need to step away. And if you're a social media enthusiast like myself, the LCC Instagram publishes industry news, updates, and examples of creative work we love. So please follow us at LCC members, and today's hashtag is #LCC Leaders Forum. So without further ado, I see Sarah Shannon, Editorial Director at Vogue Business, has just popped up. Hello, Sarah.
Hi,
As you know, Vogue Business is Condé Nast's business title, offering a global perspective on the fashion, beauty, and luxury industries. Sarah oversees Vogue Business's editorial teams around the world to deliver the news, insights, and analysis of global market forces and industry trends. Prior to her role at Vogue Business, Sarah spent over 8 years at Bloomberg. She was the senior retail reporter and had been also a regular contributor to the Financial Times and the Business of Fashion. We do hope to answer a few questions at the end, so please do pop them in the chat box as they come in. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who is going to tell us all about the now and the next. Thank you, Sarah.
Hi there, a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm just going to pop up my screen, file, and is that nice and clear for everyone? Hopefully everyone's got a thumbs up. So I'm Sarah Shannon. I'm the editorial director at Vogue Business in London. I have been at the team for about 6 months now, I think, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And really today I thought it might be a nice opportunity to talk to you guys a bit more about what the big issues are that we see on the site and across our social media platforms, and where we see the future of the industry shifting and pivoting towards. There are a lot of changes. It's been a tremendously tumultuous year, as I'm sure I don't need to tell you guys, and the US election, obviously sort of diligently watching my phone here to see what the outcome will be in Pennsylvania. But I think you know, it's been a tremendous 2020, and one of my big things at Vogue Business is, you know, we have quite a broad team, and we try and cover the industry as a B2B publication. Really, we're not a consumer publication. We're for the fashion industry and for professionals in the fashion industry. And what we like to do is really, number one, sort of present a fair, balanced and really accurate presentation of what's happening in the industry. We're not here to be salacious or to sort of point out the doom and gloom that the industry is in. You know, I think it's actually a very resilient one, luxury, and there's a lot of opportunity and potential. So we're not here to say, you know, the end is nigh, because I really don't think that's the case. And I think we'll see that as I go through this presentation. But there's a lot to be excited about, a lot of new innovations, a lot of technology, a lot of pivots to sustainability that I think the industry has reason to be proud of. And I think that'll be highlighted a lot in what we talk about today. So what is Vogue Business? We're a B2B. We have recently launched our membership. We have a large number of fashion professionals and sort of supporting industries that sign up. So people from legal, PR firms, the marketing industry, VC firms, private equity, you know, everyone's kind of watching. I think that's who we're aiming for, a kind of a reasonably professional fashion industry fashion industry professionals who we're targeted towards. We have a really key focus on technology and sustainability. Particularly, we have every Tuesday and Thursday newsletters specifically on those two topics with some editors that back those up. We also pride ourselves on being really data-led. So we have a data editor that spends a lot of time crunching numbers for us, speaking to analysts across the industry. And we're very independent. So while we're owned by Condé Nast, we're really quite separate to the rest of the business, where we have an independent team and our own standards and guidelines. And we sort of sit under new business innovations within Condé Nast. So it's a really exciting time for us. I think we're sort of taking leaps and bounds, and our audience numbers are growing exponentially. And I think I hope we're on the right path. I hope you're enjoying Vogue Business. I'm certainly having a lot of fun and heading up the team. So on the agenda today, the biggest issues that we're seeing, that, you know, the sort of things that come up on social media that my team are working across. Probably no surprises from you guys on that one. Where the opportunities are, we certainly see some really a lot of exciting things coming up that get a lot of hits, and particularly in sustainability and tech, they just seem to come up again and again where the opportunities lie, and also new markets. So we'll talk a lot about China. And then 2021 and beyond, I thought I'd take a stab at a few trends that we're seeing and that we expect to hear a lot more of next year and beyond. So the biggest issues, that looks a bit dire, like we're in dire straits. I think that's actually just taken from the US. There's a lot of stores at the moment have bought it up, but I think it's a sort of short term. Quite often after a US election, consumer spending goes down a little bit. There's a bit of barricading going on, but I don't want to suggest that it's all that tough. You know, I know that travel's halted, stores are closing, but you know, the pivot to digital's been such a strong one that we've seen some brands that, you know, previously had never been online pivoting. I spoke to Jean-Christophe Babin, the Bulgari CEO, who said in Singapore they recently launched e-commerce. They hadn't had it there before, and the number of new customers that they're bringing in, particularly females, particularly sort of the millennial, I think it was sort of 16 to 25, that was just a huge growth for them. So while it's had some hiccups, I guess, and some struggles, there's also been some big opportunities there. So if we look at, here are the top stories, and it's in no particular order. I just pulled a couple that I thought were really interesting that kind of gives a good showing of where the industry's at today. Number one, influencers are putting up paywalls. What does it mean for brands? The number of hits and requests we get for stories on influencers, I know there's a real sense of, is it over for them? But certainly not from our read in terms of the number of stories that get hit upon. Influencers just really are dominating, and it continues to surprise me. But we had a piece out this morning, I think early this week, looking at how live streaming from a lot of the big department stores are using influencers as the spokesperson now, and how well they're converting, and actually having that return on investment that you can measure. It's opposed to, a paid for post, which is quite hard, obviously. But actually, when they did the live stream themselves, they can see how much it converts and how many products are bought. So they're actually being the presenters. So, more of this to come, I think. The other one I've chatted there about is Gen Z reinventing social media. That was looking at things like, I think I was calling it sort of the dark side, where the want for for consumers to chat behind, they call it dark social, essentially what you message on WhatsApp or to your friends. So actually brands that have short films that they can pass around, it's really useful to have that. And also just the pivot away from Facebook and onto other platforms like TikTok and Douyin, and I'm sure there's dozens of others in China as well that are worth keeping track of. How brands are connecting with customers in lockdown, another really interesting piece. Again, I think it's this, sort of offering up solutions, as well as, this is a difficult moment right now, but how to, speak to consumers, the tone of voice to take. I think there were a lot of challenges about, how do you do this well? How do you communicate? How do you connect with consumers in this moment is really important. And that's certainly got a lot of traction for us. And the last one there is LVMH and Kering's new battlefield. I think arguably the two biggest luxury conglomerates, setting them up as something of a battle there. But really, I think what was so interesting talking to both the LVMH and Kering digital chiefs there was just the pace of the pivot to digital and the work that they're investing in, from personalized video shopping, setting up, putting sets up, turning stores into sort of pseudo sets for selling, the investment they're putting into their staff that they can do this. That was a really big story. I'm going to move on to the opportunities, of which there are many. I think this was the LVMH show, perhaps in Shanghai. One of them here is looking at, solutions to sustainability. And there was I think it was Queen of Raw has put together a dead stock library, a really interesting opportunity. And quite often I think with sustainability, it's about the innovations and the science that's coming up that makes, that we kind of track quite closely to see what the future could potentially be for sustainability, and those big questions that keep coming up when they offer some solutions there. The traction's incredible. Out of bankruptcy, Neiman Marcus plans a comeback. A very well-read story for us, and obviously Neiman, a household name in the States certainly, and I think broadly for the luxury industry as well. They were in Chapter 11, so not quite officially bankruptcy. It's more bankruptcy proceedings, but life beyond there. I think still having a lot of the big names who are willing to, stick with the plan and stay in the stores. I know Chanel, Dolce & Gabbana, all still in there. So there's life after that chapter 11 for Neiman. How much more would you pay for a sustainable t-shirt? This is a great story. Really interesting. It was actually, it was broken down by demographics. So thinking about, will the brands, will consumers pay that bit more for sustainability? And surprisingly, it wasn't as much as you'd think. Especially the younger consumer who, surveys suggest are much more sustainably minded. That doesn't mean that actually they're willing to pay more for it. So that, I think the outcome is there's some work to be done in consumer education in terms of getting them to understand the processes and the costs behind making products more sustainably. And more sustainably probably isn't the correct term, but better. And so yeah, that story did incredibly well, actually. It was a real, that was George Arnott, our data editor. How J.W. Anderson's cardigan went viral on TikTok. I was convinced that this was going to be very clever marketing tactics, which I'm sure you guys are all potentially trying to go viral on TikTok. And I believe TikTok's actually talking a bit later on, so they'll be one to ask about this. But what was so interesting was, in fact, it isn't. It's not something that you can plan. It's just such an organic platform. I think the potential for brands there was actually harnessing when something does go viral and then taking it to the next level and kind of running with it, but actually making something go viral, it's incredibly hard. And actually what was good with J.W. Anderson, Jonathan, an incredible designer and businessman as well, but he actually gave up, I believe, the cardigans pattern, so people could go there and make it themselves. It was being essentially made by kids that were, and it sort of keeps on flicking past, but you could see the cardigan there and people were making it themselves, and then he actually gave up the pattern. So a really smart way of just building up consumer awareness for the brand, for a very London-based brand that has a lot of trajectory potentially. And then the final one, how Ralph Lauren does diversity, that was Christina Binkley, who's our editor at large, who's a fantastic reporter. She's ex Wall Street Journal and does a lot of great stuff for us, but she actually got some time with Ralph to talk about, his processes and how they've, really, if you think about Ralph and remember, I remember Tyson Beckford, the matte black model, being on the cover of all his campaigns back in the 90s. And in fact, he was, I believe the model, so I think in the 1993 called out Milan Fashion Week, or said he wouldn't walk because there weren't enough black males modeling at the time. And so rather immediately Ralph picked him up and put him on all his campaigns and worked really closely with him. And I think the story was really looking at what he's done within the company and how important diversity is for his brand, not only in the marketing messaging, but also the bottom line. They have actually a whole team that's set up that approves every product, that makes sure that they have diversity front of mind all the time. So he's been doing it for a long time, and I think the results show. So that was a really interesting story. So let's get on to the interesting stuff, what we think is going to be happening further out. It's been a tricky 2020, and we see a lot of resilience, and I find it personally really exciting time for the industry. So this is in no particular order. I just want to say I haven't prioritized anything, but we really love to, if there's any feedback or thoughts you have, I'd love to keep the discussion going, because this is really from a news perspective where we see the agenda going. I'm sure will have your own opinions. So I'd love to, let's keep an active dialogue. I'll be keen to hear any thoughts you have. Number one, and again, the first one I've pulled up is gender neutrality. The images that are popping up on your screen right now are looking at the Soho Adidas store, their first gender neutral store in London that's recently opened. And they've merchandised it, it's gender neutrally merchandised. So it does mean that you have to have a lot of product, a lot of sizes across to meet that. And, arguably tracksuits, hoodies, it's a little easier to do for Adidas and trainers. But I think it's really the future, and we're seeing a lot more brands take this on board and running with it. Browns East, the department store, their Shoreditch outpost is also gender neutral. There's a New York brand that has their new store like that. Yeah, there's lots of, I think we're really seeing this as a potential here, not only in stores, but also in brands and how they're developing. And there's no survey that we see that doesn't say that it's an expectation of Gen Z, maybe a little less so in terms of how they actually buy the product. But I think, the future's here. And I've referenced here this great brand, Re-Ink. Do you remember Megan Rapinoe? She was the US soccer star with the fantastic purple hair. She set up and the US soccer team won the World Cup, the Americans did, and she's actually set up a brand that's gender neutral, and it has sizes from sort of XX small to XXXXL, I think, so, and has some really high profile backer, so a really exciting potential there. Diversity and inclusivity, without a doubt, I think the industry, has some way to go here, but there's been a lot of really fundamental conversations starting to happen, and we can see a lot of brands coming out and being a lot louder on who's on their diversity council, the actual breakup of the mix of their management and also the employees, their actual workforce. I know Gucci's quite loud on actually being transparent about the mix of their workforce, of how, of the ethnicity. I know it's not legal to actually do that in Europe. It makes it a lot harder because you can't actually access that information or publicize it. But certainly you can in the UK, you can in America, and I think we're going to see more and more of this, of brands being a lot more transparent about the information they do have, and about, I think a lot of the steps seem to be looking inwards to make any real, meaningful changes. So I expect to see a lot more of that, and I think it's a really exciting time and a positive one. So in the 15% pledge, there were so many great social media call outs as well that I think really have made a difference. So it's a really exciting time. I'm looking forward to more of that this year and beyond. Gen Z, their values and expectations. I'm actually, next week, we have the the Vogue Business and Google Summit. It's our first global summit, and the keynote speakers with Marco Bizzarri, the CEO of Gucci. And in our preparation for that, we've just been going back and forth about the topics and, the key things to unpack, because the topic is the future of fashion. And we just keep on coming back to Gen Z and its importance, and their values, and how much brands are pivoting towards those, and how transparent and how much accountability that is expected by Gen Z on brands. The US election is a really interesting one, because we've been a lot of brands have been saying vote in a very non-partisan manner. The outcome of the election, I think, there's some expectation on Gen Z we've seen for brands to, take a stand and be political. In many ways, they're, brands are expected to be politicians. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time. I was going to say as well on Gen Z, we kind of look a lot about as well as the platforms that they're on, but there's also a real sense of the accountability they expect from brands, means that we'll see more and more people being louder on other issues, like, for example, carbon neutrality. How soon will you get to that point? There was a sort of a period where it was all very an expectation of, being carbon neutral in 2050. And for Gen Z, that doesn't really mean a lot. It's too far out. They want something to be happening right now. So I think there'll be some shifts there in terms of what brands are expected to do, and some kind of immediacy in that as well. And also, I think, as I sort of spoke to earlier about gender neutrality, these sort of things needing to be built into business models a lot faster, and we can see those pivots happening. Global markets, where the growth is, absolutely. I think we've seen this year that, the one bright spot, or, encouraging place has been China. These are, I should say, Deutsche Bank estimates. So it's not official, that there is some forecasting within this. And even here we can see the Chinese are ever so slightly down, but I guess year on year they did have COVID there. But without a doubt, the growth is going to be in China. And we see brands opening stores, trialing, Burberry had this fantastic Shenzhen store that was all WeChat enabled. It's the, most glamorous thing you've ever seen. It looks fantastic, but also just so connected and really for that Chinese, Gen Z and millennial consumer as well. And then I think the other sort of point to note is that while, I think the luxury sector for quite a long time had relied on the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, we're not actually seeing a lot of repatriation of spending in those countries. So, while the Chinese are at home, spending at home, Russians, Middle Easterns, Indians right now aren't spending the money in their domestic market when they can't travel. We know that they enjoy coming to Paris to buy their Chanel handbag, going to Milan to buy the Gucci, coming to London to buy the Burberry trench coat or the, Aquascutum or Fortnum & Mason, all these wonderful brands, and coming here and being in London to enjoy those products. But we're not seeing that happen when they're back at home. So, I think, that there's something to be said for that. Does that mean that we should rely more on the travel when it resumes? I'm sure it's something that you guys are all planning for and thinking about quite heavily, but certainly what we're not seeing is the Russians, the Middle Easterns and the Indians actually buying that much while they're back at home. I think also just to note that while the Europeans are down, there has been a little bit more buoyancy, and particularly as well in North America. So last earnings that we had for LVMH, Caring, and in fact Richemont come out on Friday with their Q3, but pretty much everyone, and Moncler I think, and Hermes as well, everyone's pulled out. America is actually doing quite well. So I think there's quite a lot of pent-up demand there. They haven't been spending on experiences as they would have in the past because of the lockdown measures. So luxury, actual, hard products, hard luxury, soft luxury is doing a lot better. And a couple of brands, particularly I know Caring and LVMH, both were quite loud about how well North America and America in particular are doing. So some bright spots there. The US election dependent, of course. I'll flick over to technology. This is really one of the fun parts of the beat, I think. Augmented reality, such a lot of fun. There was a really great, I think it was Gucci that had this AR application where it was using a phone and you could wave your phone and this app over your feet, and the shoe would present as if it was on your foot. And there's all this great testing and happening. I mean, I always say to Megan McDowell, who's our tech reporter, it's all very on the cusp. And I think the big brands obviously have the money and the investment to trial all these great new potentials, but there are a lot coming up. So we have a lot of fun reporting these out, and AR, I think particularly, is one of the bigger ones. Digital clothing as well. I think it was Ralph Lauren and Snap did you could dress your Bitmoji, your digital avatar, and essentially you could put them in a polo t-shirt with the logo here, and then you could also buy it physically, in stores, or you could order it. That seems to be getting quite a lot of traction. It's very much for a Gen Z consumer, and I think a lot of the time, while it's not so much a sales push, it's much more of a marketing one. But that's a really interesting place. Also Dressed, I think, are sort of more of a sort of fashion gaming, that you do style challenges essentially, and you can fit yourself out in Fendi and whatever high Prada, whatever brand you want, and then you can actually buy it. It's a link to Farfetch as well. So you do the styling challenge, you fit yourself out, and then if you like clothes, you can buy them as well. So we're seeing, I think on video games in particularly, so quite a young consumer. Video shopping. Oh, darling, mommy's on. Sorry, school run. Thank you. So I think video shopping as well, we're seeing quite a lot of that. We had a chat, I was going to say Gucci again, but they actually have turned their part of their Florence store, I believe, it's called Gucci Live. And essentially they've turned their store into a set, if you will, for live video shopping. So the staff can walk around, you have a one-on-one chat with your high net clients that are repeat shoppers, and you walk around and sell to them and show them the store. And so I think we'll, expect to see a lot more of that. And futuristic fashion shows. Helsinki had this digital only fashion show with virtual reality. I mean, it was out of this world. A lot of it, I would say, you do need to have a headset, and I've got this big clunky thing here to have a play around with. It actually made me feel a little bit, I found I had a little bit of almost motion sickness. I think VR's got a bit of a way to go, but certainly it's, the future of fashion shows. There's a lot of fun, I think, can be had there. And saying that, the real outcome, I think, from last Paris certainly was the return to physicals feels quite important, and certainly it's what the buyers enjoy, and I guess the experience and having the shows being tangible and seeing the clothes. There was kind of a pivot back to that, but I think there is, these digital aspects that some of them have worked. It's been a sort of a mixed bag, but I think there's a lot of potential to be quite creative. And, this is what the industry is good at, what fashion's particularly good at. So I think there's a lot of potential there and a lot of fun to be had as well. Sustainability, without a doubt, one of the issues of our generation, and a huge one for the fashion industry. And it's just some amazing steps, I think, are being made to get there, and so in leaps and bounds, really. Circularity, without a doubt, feels like it's becoming almost, top of the agenda in terms of what consumers expect of brands. Quite recently, I think it was August, Tommy Hilfiger came out with their circular fashion plan. And I think while it's, it's really laudable. I think they're probably one of the first brands to come out and say that they will be. I think the plans as far back as 2030 or even 2050 to get there. But what's so interesting about that is that, it requires such a holistic change to how they do business that it's not something that can be a buzzword that you can, greenwash, if you will. And so I think, I expect to see more of that, but the back end, the changes to how you do business, the relationships and the partnerships you need to have with your supply chain, with technology, with innovators, it requires, really, I would say, holistic sort of business model change. So, I think Tommy Hilfiger have done a tremendous job. Our sustainability reporter or editor had a really good deep dive into it with quite a lot of sustainable experts, and they were really impressed. But I know that from Tommy Hilfiger's perspective, it was years in the making. So I don't think it's, I'm expecting to see more of this and more brands coming out and saying this is what our plans are. But I don't think it's certainly not a light or easy undertaking, I would say. Resale and rental, two quite different things, although they often blend a little together. Resale, I think, really is the future. I think we're going to see a tremendous pivot towards this. The RealReal is doing incredibly well and has had some really big British partners. I mean, Stella McCartney recently joined, Burberry, and I think Gucci as well. And Gucci actually selling their own product, so seconds, last season stock on the RealReal. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this, especially when you think of these big names coming on board. Whereas rentals had a little bit more, I think the jury is a bit more out on rental. I think the platforms have all been fairly niche. Few of them have really reached profitability. I think where when they are niche, when they're sort of occasion wear, I think men's, sort of streetwear, there are a couple of interesting platforms that are working, or seem to be working a little better. But there's also, I would say I think the industry, and certainly the analysts that I talk to, are yet to be convinced on this one. I don't know that there's been as much investment as there has, for example, in resale, where you hear about funding rounds and funding rounds and funding rounds. Carbon neutrality, without a doubt, another massive issue that we're hearing a lot more about. And again, I think a difficult one to put in place, but I think the expectations are there. Moncler recently came out saying they expect to be carbon neutral by 2021. I think we'll see more brands coming to this, but again, I think it's this, the back end of getting there. It takes, a lot of work. And also, I think, and I alluded to it at the beginning, but these things need to be happening with realistic deadlines that are meaningful. I think when brands come out and say, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050, it kind of passes over our heads, and it doesn't get it doesn't resonate as much. Whereas I know the feedback that we get when someone says loudly, Moncler, we're going to be carbon neutral by next year, people pick it up, people talk about it. And then I think worker rights. So actually the supply chain having a place on the table when we're setting sustainability goals and targets, that feels like something that there's certainly a lot more momentum towards. We're seeing, quite loud Bangladesh and Pakistan sort of trade unions and organisations and not-for-profits being a lot louder about, getting these big sustainability forums on board and getting them to the table. So I expect, there was such a lot this year about all these contracts being cancelled and all these great big orders stopping, and the impact on the supply chain side, from Bangladesh, but also from, in really important markets like Italy, who are huge manufacturers and luxury manufacturers and suppliers there. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. And that's certainly an expectation that we see and we expect in our coverage. So here are my key takeaways. The big issues this year, without a doubt, COVID-19 absolutely dominating the headlines, but with some, some good intent there. I think the digital pivot and just how, and also just considering the reset that was put out there from things like, the pace of newness, the level of production that's coming up, the fashion shows themselves, Gucci cutting back from 5 a year to 2, Saint Laurent stepping out of Paris this year. There's been a lot that's really dominated the agenda, and of course diversity, Black Lives Matter campaign, and as ever influencers and marketing shifts, how the new platforms can work and how you reach consumers. The opportunities, endless, really. I think it's there's so much happening right now, and I could run through all these again, but I think the innovations and solutions to sustainability, all the technology that's happening out there, Reels, Instagram, Amazon luxury stores, there's just so much potential and so many new technologies that make for a very exciting time. But I think, much for luxury, it's about being able to deliver that wonderful experience that you have in a store to a digital one, and that really seems to be the kind of demarcator in terms of what brands are willing to go into and what brands are willing to test and try, and often it can just be a marketing opportunity, particularly for Gen Z. And then looking beyond 2021, we do think that China really is the growth story. Some Asia, but really it's China. The first time luxury buyer there is just so important. And I think that plays to why I think stores will continue to be hugely important in China as well. I don't think we're seeing any suggestion that it has to just be digital, because if that growing, emerging middle class, that wealthy young shopper wants to buy their first Gucci handbag, their first Burberry trench coat, they want to go into a store and see that and have that experience. So I think that's a hugely important part. And Europe, while we think will come back, I think there's more opportunity potentially in the States. And these are very broad takes, obviously specific to your brands. I'm sure they'll be very different. And then in terms of reaching 2019 pandemic levels, the general sentiment, I think prior to this second period of lockdown was 2022 will be back. I think from the few kind of analyst notes and the conversations I've had since lockdown, and it's only been, in the UK certainly a day, but in Italy it's just hit, France and Europe as well, and France and Germany. The feeling is 2023 might be more likely. So They're my big key takeaways. It's been a pleasure. Rosie, I'm very keen to have a chat. If anyone wants to ask me some questions more about Vogue Business and what we're about, I should put a plug in because we do have our big summit next week, November 12th, 13th, including the Gucci interview, but we've got some great speakers coming up. The Tapestry chairman will be joining us, and yeah, I think it's going to be a good one. So if you're members, please join us. If you're not, please look into becoming members. There's a lot of exciting stuff on Vogue Business.
Sarah, thank you so much for those insights. We do have a couple of questions from the audience for you.
Great.
We've got about 5 minutes. How long does Vogue Business predict it will take to bounce back after a COVID recession based on prior crashes?
Ooh, I mean,
tough one.
golden. I mean, yeah, $1 million question. I think we've sort of, I was just linked at the very last point there that, prior to this second lockdown, I know Bain and Alta Gamma had said 2022 was the expectation for sort of sales levels to reach this, to reach 2019 levels again. But I think the feeling was that it might be pushed back a little longer. Saying that, there is, a real sense that this second lockdown, brands are a lot better set up for it. Consumers are also more used to it. People that hadn't previously gone online have gone online. They've experimented. They've tried out, all these new platforms. They've made luxury purchases online now. So it's not like we're going through that absolute dip again. We're used to stores being closed in many levels. So I think there's certainly a feeling that this lockdown won't be as severe, if you will. And also we're coming into the holiday, this crucial holiday trading period. And there's a lot of expectation on that, but I think people do want to lift. So I think there will be, and I'd be interested to know how heavily people are looking at things like Cyber Monday, the real kickoff to the shopping season. But I think there's a sentiment that this lockdown won't be as severe, and also, but saying that, it is a second lockdown. So I think there's a slight pushback in terms of recovery. That's quite a long-winded answer.
No, well, I mean, that sounds about right, and fingers crossed that, yeah, we're not heading back into such dark days again. The next question I have, and final question, is: do you think, or does Vogue Business think, whichever is your opinion, or the platforms, do you think there'll be another Chanel or Dior come out of this generation of designers?
Without a doubt. If it's not a brand, then it may well be a technology or a platform that's just going to change so fast how we buy, sell, and conceive of luxury, even just by way of repurposing luxury right now has become so fashionable. And what we consider to be luxury is such a more democratic thing, if you will. It's no longer for behind closed door, an elite thing that you can't touch. Luxury is for everyone, and I think the new generation will know this and be part of it, and make the brands and the platforms and innovations to have that. I mean, you could argue, look at something like Depop, not here 5 years ago, and now doing, probably going to IPO in the next, I don't know actually, but I'm watching closely for them to IPO and be one of the next big billion-dollar companies. So yeah, I think, and brands and fashion labels are, there's so many exciting new ones. I look at Richard Quinn, his own business. He's a businessman as well as a designer. So yeah, I think there will be other brands that will become the Chanels, the Diors, and let's look to China as well, because there's a real sense of nationalism there as well, especially from the younger generations. They really enjoy their own brands and their own products, and I think we're certainly seeing quite a rise in China beauty. They call it sea beauty, but big Chinese brands that are doing very well. But I think there will definitely be some Chinese brands that will, whether they translate into the Western Europe, that might not even matter. Their market size is so big, but they could well be the size of Chanel or Dior. It's just in their own market. So yeah, I think that's definite potential.
Well, thank you for that. Well, time will tell. That is all we have time for, but thank you so much to Sarah. You've given us a huge amount to think about. Next up, we have a conversation with leading digital experts entitled Innovation Insights, the New Way of Connecting with Consumers. The link is in your schedule shared yesterday. It's been emailed to you an hour ago and can also be found here on the forum microsite. We will see you very shortly. Thank you.